Welcome back. You're watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. The real China lies beyond the Euro stereotypes portrayed in sensational reporting. It's important to ask, what is the country really like? What are the Chinese really thinking? What do the youth in China really aspire to be? Even though those questions have been asked by generations of China hands, they have become more relevant when China opens up and reaches out to the world. No wonder Zak Dychtwald, a young American of the post-90s generation, set the record straight. After living and working in China, he put his life stories, including a nuanced view of his Chinese peers, into a book entitled Young China, How the Restless Generation Will Change Their Country and the World. It's an inside look at China's post-90s generation, which kept on dreaming and thriving. I invited Zak to CGTN for a chat. We started by talking about the so-called colored lens that some use to see China. Zak, what a pleasure to have you on CGTN.
Thank you so much for having me, Wei.
But you know, from time to time people question whether everybody understand the narrative about China.
Yeah.
Is the real narrative. Have you been consciously thinking about that question?
There's two different audiences. There's the narrative that we know from here in Beijing, and that's an elite narrative that follows the China narrative every day. And then there's the rest of the world. The rest of the world sees young people as little emperors, spoiled brats. They don't see them as incredibly talented students, incredibly talented thinkers, increasingly innovative young people. They don't see that. They see little emperors. They don't see China as an increasingly innovative space. They don't see people as independent thinkers. They see people as part of a large whole. Even the cover of my book, the first picture that my publisher showed me was a group of Chinese kids all in student gear. All from a distance, everyone looking more or less the same. They see a group, a mass of people. They don't see individuals. So to have a young person on the front of the cover who's thoughtful, who's thinking about the world, who's alone in a big city, in the West, outside of China, that's a new narrative, focusing on the individual. The born after 90 generation in particular is known as the me generation.
Right.
It's the first generation not as focused on the collective and thinking about, what do I want? What do I dream of? What do I want for my family? That's a different set of considerations.
Very interesting. On the other hand, there's the issue of, you know, the party, the state, and the individual in China. What is it like, that relationship?
I mean, this young generation grew up open-minded. They grew up with the internet. They grew up watching, you know, it's not just studying Western history. I have friends who can quote How I Met Your Mother, Barney from How I Met Your Mother, but also Martin Luther King Jr. They know our history. They've studied the West. They are far more fluent in our culture than we are of China, easily. 1/3 of all students studying abroad in America are from China. 2/3 of all passport holders in China are under the age of 37. You know, that's the born after 80 and born after 90.
Right.
So this young generation has seen the world. And more than any other generation in Chinese history, they recognize that, you know, everywhere has problems. Much more so even than the older generation. They recognize that America isn't that great. And China has its problems too, but at least it's getting stuff done. And it's getting stuff done at a rate that provides them personally a better opportunity than being somewhere else. That's powerful.
But as you may know, when China is getting much wealthier than it used to be, the growth rate is likely to slow down.
Yeah.
So is the changes of families and of life for the better. That's also likely to slow down. Do you think if they can take it?
I think this pride is more resilient than we give it credit for. I think young people are recognizing that it can be cool to be Chinese. It could be, you know, they can innovate internationally with the best of folks. When Jack Ma went to go have the largest IPO in the world from a creative industry in New York, that's a message to young Chinese who had before thought only Westerners or Steve Jobs can be innovative, that, hey, we can be innovative too. You're seeing right now that young people are willing to sort of stand shoulder to shoulder internationally. The older generation didn't have that same sort of pride, that belief in the strength of not just China as a country, but Chinese as individuals.
But now China and the United States, it's apparently in some kind of war, shall we say, trade war. You know? Do you think the Chinese young people that you've been interacting with? I'm sure during your book tour and stuff, you've been talking to them, your friends as well.
Yeah.
What do they think about that?
I think rather than focusing on the trade war that's happening this year, what people are recognizing is that now there's parity between the two countries. 15 years ago, if you were to say China and America are in a battle of equals, people would have rolled their eyes. That wasn't the case. There's recently on the Chinese internet, there's been a funny World Cup joke, which is 美中不足. It's an old saying that means within something perfect there is a blemish or an imperfection. But literally it means America and China don't play soccer. And so the joke is that Americans and Chinese, they're two strong, powerful countries. We just sit back and watch other people entertain us. But what that, you know...
of course, that's just a joke.
It's a joke, but what it sort of suggests underneath is right now that there are these two countries who are equals.
Yeah.
And I think that's what this young generation believes.
Despite changes, there are always things uniquely Chinese that pull back people to a lifelong commitment in China. The food is a big part of it. Zak, after living in Sichuan, best known for the world's hot and spicy cuisine, was excited to tell me about all the magic in the dishes. That's all a peek into a real life in Middle China. Chengdu is a place really you can enjoy yourself.
Absolutely.
Great food, great atmosphere. People just take it easy, as they say. I got two questions for you about Chengdu. First is, what's your favorite food?
First is 烤鱼. It's barbecued fish technically, but it's barbecued fish and then it's immersed in oil, and that oil is sort of slow cooked with herbs and spices. You have potato. You can add a lot of different stuff, and it's served in a hot pan. There's nothing like it that we have back home.
Going to 烤鱼 together with friends, it's really a big way for young people to hang out in Chengdu or in other cities across China.
Absolutely. My friends and I make jokes about how the older generation in China used to focus on eating bitter, right? 吃苦. And the joke now is that everyone in China just eats hot pot. On one hand, you have the older generation working hard and having to do delayed gratification. Chengdu is a great example of the want to 活在当下, to live in the moment. One of our favorite toasts in Chengdu is 今朝有酒,今朝醉.
Oh, really? You guys say that?
Today we have booze, so today we drink. It's a commitment to being here now.
The other thing is, what were you there for?
It felt like the world was getting China wrong, often focusing on old China versus young China. And by that, I don't just mean age. I don't just mean older people versus younger people. I mean, there's an older perception of China, you know, from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, that isn't China today.
You wrote about young people, particularly young boys in China, thinking about their future, think about marriage and the real estate. And what is exactly the relationship among all of these phenomena?
China's property market is propped up on a marriage market. Different than anywhere else in the world, so many of the young people I talked to, particularly men, described the frustration of having to own property in order to be seen an eligible bachelor, in order to get married. It was that, you know, the ability to own property that allowed people to have allowed not just the woman in the relationship, but more their parents, that feeling of safety, that feeling of security. What that means is that they often have to borrow from their grandparents. They have to borrow from their parents. So you get this entire family structure saving money to support their child in order to buy an apartment. I think you're having some people bend to the pressure. I think you're having other people reinvent the wheel. When you look at places like Shenzhen, when you look at people, especially in the startup community, they're not buying apartments anymore because it doesn't make sense. The IMF recently had a report that came out that said 7 out of 10 of the least livable cities in the world in terms of housing market prices are in China.
Right.
7 out of 10. So if you're a business person, you know that that doesn't make economic sense. But because there's a cultural imperative, young people are still buying it.
So how is that having an impact, the so-called divide or gap of wealth having on the young people? Have you met people from very different social groups?
So one of the interesting things about being a foreigner in China, especially when you speak Chinese, is you can sort of hang out with a lot of different people.
Yeah.
So I've been on the side of the road eating shaokao with, you know, 15 quiet person, and a Maserati will go by, and watching the faces of my friends change when they see that type of wealth, realizing that they're never going to be able to get that. That's something that they dream of. It's never going to happen for them. I've had that experience. The other experience, though, I've also had. I've been in that Maserati with one of these ultra-rich young Chinese people watching people on the side of the street eating xiaokao. And that person in the Maserati is describing to me how lonely they are. Because China has developed so fast, and really there's no international comparison for what China has achieved, especially in the last 27 or 28 years of my lifetime, that China's extremes are further apart, far further apart.
Some books on China not only offers knowledge, but real insight about how that country has been evolving on the ground. In the 1930s, for example, Edgar Snow, an American journalist, went to Yan'an and vividly wrote his interactions with and observations of the young Chinese revolutionaries in his phenomenal book, Red Star over China. Decades later, Peter Hessler, a Peace Corps volunteer who taught his Chinese students English in inland China, revealed to the world real Chinese lives in transition in his book, The River Town. And a few decades later, Zak's efforts in describing China's post-90s generation has become an important glimpse into China's challenges and vitalities as well. But Zak told me that even he is afraid to be disconnected with the fast-changing China. Therefore, he might want to move back again just to feel the pulse and the heartbeat of 1.5 billion people again. You saw different generations of so-called Lao Wai trying to understand China, dating back to the Edgar Snow, American journalist, young, came to China, tried to experience what is it like, and wrote a book, Red Star over China. You also see different generations of Lao Wai coming to China, try to write down their experiences. Most recently from the United States, for example, Peter Hessler,
Of course.
And Evan Osnos.
Evan Osnos.
Are you really that different from them? Have you ever thought about that?
What's interesting is that Peter Hessler's China doesn't really exist anymore. That scared me when I first got to China. I'd read everything that there was on China, especially focusing on Hessler. And when I went back to those places, they changed so radically.
Were you disappointed, or were you happy about that?
I was freaked out, honestly. I thought I had done...
That's a great phrase.
I really was. I mean, again, I wasn't planning on writing a book at the time, so I'm just like, I had done all my homework. I had come to the place to see it. I was ready to learn, and it was all different.
Actually, Peter wrote that book mainly as a Peace Corps volunteer.
Right, so he was a teacher in even a backwater of Lushan.
Exactly.
Even a smaller
So
place.
did you go there?
I did go there, and what you see is you see about 10 times as many cars. You see enormous high-rises. Most people there can start to speak Mandarin. So, you're not, when he described the area, it was densely regional. It was even different than Chengdu. But what you're starting to see is the younger generations, they're not just paying attention to what their parents are saying or what their teachers are saying. They're watching videos that are coming out of Beijing. They're on their phones interacting with people from Harbin. So it's far more, maybe not global, but national. The conversations that people are having are not that different than the conversations that they'd have in Chengdu or even that they'd have in Beijing. And so we don't focus on generations as much in China. I mean, in China, there's a major generation focus, but there wasn't a new version, and there wasn't something trying to contextualize all of the change, especially in the last 30 years. Right. And I think it's, especially when you think of America and China, focusing on the people is what's going to bring our countries closer.
I understand that you're moving back to China?
I'm thinking about it.
Wow.
I'm thinking very seriously about it. Right now, I spend about half my time with China with my think-tanking consultancy, and I love it here. I have much more fun in China than I do back home.
Admit it, you miss the food.
I miss the food enormously. It really is an issue. In New York, you're starting to have good Sichuan food, but it's not the same.
It's not the same. Yeah. But young China, as the book said, will China remain young? That's a deep question, isn't it?
It's a really deep question. I think China is going to continue to start reinventing itself, or continue to reinvent itself. Young China has a lot of meanings. First, it's young people.
Yeah, sure.
Fine. But it's also a young identity. This young generation, I call them the restless generation, but they're also the identity generation. They are deciding what it means to be Chinese in the modern world. They're going to be going out and interacting with the world for the first time as a China that's on a level playing field. That's an enormous responsibility, and it's something that it's something that's going to happen over the next several decades, not just in this 5 years.
Zach, what a pleasure having you here on our program,
and
I'm looking forward to learning more about the real young China, as you describe in your book.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Oh, that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Inside CGTN into your search engine. Check out our YouTube channel. Also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tianwei, and everyone on the World Inside team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.